about the new museology. I think the trouble sometimes is that if we're not careful, sociology becomes a handmaiden, as it were, a servant to some other set of interests. It takes rather than makes its problems, if I could put it that way. Thirdly, I want to come on to the notion that the museum, the notion that sociology might itself be a museum discipline, that there might be a museum of sociology. This is the third option I put up for thought and for discussion. And you immediately say, as I say to myself, well, where is this animal if it's ever existed? We've had museums perhaps of anthropology, ethnography. One can think of academic disciplines that quite naturally seem to relate to the museum. Art history, certain kinds of social history, geography perhaps even. But when you kind of scratch your head and think, oh, has there ever been a museum of sociology? And it is certainly difficult to find examples or to think of contemporary examples. And the one I can think of closed down, Urbis in Manchester. And I think if one just kind of goes back a few decades, though, back to the early 20th century, there are some candidates. One can see some people talking about the idea of a sociological museum. The animal does seem to exist in the States. There is some discussion in the literature of such museums in Europe. I do know that there was an attempt to create a sociological museum at DePaul University in Indiana, and also there seems to have been attempts in Harvard. Although quite a lot of these museums, I think, were geared towards public health issues and the transmission of sort of public education. My question still remains, in a sense, where would we find, if ever, a real sociological museum, in the sense in which one might say once had anthropological museums? And I think the answer's been sitting sort of underneath me for 30 years, and I'd never noticed it, at the University of Kiel, where I worked for most of my life. In Britain, in the first half of the 20th century, the now defunct Sociological Society regarded the museum as part of its mission, much influenced by the ecological perspectives of the French thinker Frédéric Leplay, and also by Auguste Comte, the French sociologist. The Sociological Society, I would argue, was less interested, as some people are, in illustrating research findings than in generating sociology through the medium of the museum. I think this organization, which is an early 20th century British sociological organization, was interested in actually thinking sociologically through the medium of the museum. And I would argue that the museum was its means of reimagining the social and its way of promoting the public understanding of sociology. I use that phrase quite deliberately. The public understanding of science is a phrase we're quite familiar with. Now let me try and say a little bit about the Sociological Society. It's founded in 1903. Its key members were a man called Patrick Geddes and another man called Victor Branford. Names that are hardly remembered today, but certainly Patrick Geddes in his own time, he died in 1932, Patrick Geddes was a very well-known sort of Scottish polymath with a key interest in sociology, but also in geography. These two people, and Branford, this man, Victor Branford, was important partly because he bankrolled the society. He was actually a banker, quite a successful one. These two people form part of a society which played a crucial role, I think, in the early 20th century in Britain, in grappling with key problems of sociological theory, and also engaging with issues of urban reconstruction and urban development, and more precisely, and this is very important for Geddes, of civic planning. And today, actually, if you say the name Patrick Geddes, the sociologists will look blank. The people who won't look blank are the are the town planners. They will say, oh yes, I remember Patrick Geddes, he was on my first year course as a student. Now the Society was a research centre located at a place called Le Play House, back one, in Chelsea. That's an oil painting, and what I need to tell you is that this is not untypical of some of the objects that are in our archive. This is an oil painting, anonymous, it's in the archive, and it's a picture of the headquarters of the Society in Chelsea. Now a hotel, you can go and stay in it if you want. It held meetings, it organised lectures, discussions, it promoted sociology in universities and colleges. It was called Le Play. Frederick Le Play, some of you may realise, was employed by Napoleon III to mastermind the Paris Exposition of 1867. And he organised this big international exposition, including the layout and the organisation and everything, under Napoleon III. And it's one of the things that comes out when you look through this archive, you realise that these sociologists were really interested in international expositions. They wrote about them, they published articles about them, and there are a number of pictures, including that one and the next one, 1900, and the next one, which just appear in the archive. And they obviously were very interested in international expositions and in exhibitionary representations of the world, if you like. So international expositions and exhibitions were a major preoccupation of the Society. The history, I'm not going to go into it now, the history of the Society is complex, it's fisperous, there are kind of quarrels and arguments, and there are a number of related associations, all of which have their archive at the University of Kiel. What I want to emphasize here are three aspects of the Society's work, and I'll call them regional surveys, the visual material, and museums. Let me just quickly go through them. Regional surveys were the hallmark of this society, the Sociological Society. And from the 1920s through to the 1950s, the Society conducted a large number of regional surveys across the UK and many other European countries and regions. And the perspective underlying all of these surveys was that of Frederick Le Play, the French sociologist, who was a pioneer in the study of family and community. And that's what these sociologists were interested in, the relationship between family and community, but set within its regional context. And this is why I think the group is quite interesting for you. They had a profound sense that the region was the unit of analysis for social science. And I'm probably not going to have time to go into this, but I think this is quite important in the sense that for much of the 20th century, I think both sociology, you could argue, both sociology and museums shared a nation-centered perspective. They, in a way, both colluded in sort of defining the world as though it was a conglomeration, aggregation of nations and nation-states. Sociologists certainly tended to assume that society was the nation. So what's interesting about this group is that they kind of give us a different way of cutting the cake and of thinking about how social problems are located, and not necessarily located in a centered way within nation states. Interestingly, they visited Rome. I simply pulled this out because I was coming here. They went to a lot of European countries, and some of them are interesting because they're, if one can still use the expression, new accession to the European community. They went to Poland, went to parts of Central Europe. They did visit Russia, but they came to Italy in 1934. If we go on, I'll show you what they came. Sorry, I'll skip this because I don't think I've got time. But if we just quickly look at these two slides, they're terribly interested in Chelsea, by the way, if anyone's interested in Chelsea. But it gives you an idea. They were interested in how Chelsea might be improved. They're town planners. This is what Chelsea looks like, as it were, now. And the next one is how it might be, in the next picture, after we've sorted it out for you. But I haven't got time to go into that, but they are they are quite closely connected with a lot of sort of, if you like, Chelsea intellectuals of the period. But they went to Milan and Rome, and they were particularly interested in the functioning of local government in Italy under fascism. 20 people went over from the sociological survey team. For those of you who are interested in these things, one of them was the father of the Social Democrat politician, Shirley Williams, a man called Conlin. It's interesting when you look at the paperwork and the reports, they're not quite sure what to do about fascism. They met Robert Michels in Rome. They met fascist leaders. They met a fascist youth leader called Staracci, if you go on to the next slide. And here they came back with their fascist youth loyalty card. I've got both sides for it. Do you have, I don't know if in Italy you have supermarket loyalty cards. This is what you got then, your youth. And I think there's an oath of loyalty there. And on the other side of the card, if you go on to the next slide, that's my knowledge of Italian history is not strong, but I think he was a key player under Mussolini in Rome. But what they do when they come to Rome, Italy, they do what they typically do everywhere. They look at social welfare institutions. They look at the family. They go to youth penitentiaries or whatever. All that kind of thing. Regional surveys. Visual sociology is the other thing that interests them. And this is where I can simply perhaps tell you that in the collection there are over 4,000 glass lantern slides, photographs that they took on these surveys, travelling all over Europe. The best, as it were, turned over area was in fact the city of Chester in England, but there are lantern slides of Poland, Italy. I think there are kind of Italian peasants doing their washing, that kind of thing. I think, for me, the way to sum it up is to say that the only other archive I can think of that's comparable is the Albert Kahn archive in Paris, where you get a kind of similar interest in a kind of partly in a peasantry that appears to be on the moment of sort of disappearance and so on. But there is this enormously rich visual archive which has only, as it were, resurfaced recently from Europe, collected by these British sociologists.